It's got so much energy. Makes me feel like I'm back on radio. Welcome to the first day of Radio Week. Today's session is a session on management and strategy. And primarily the big topic, running a successful radio station in the 21st century. And we are delighted to have an exceptional panel of very experienced radio industry professionals to provide their insights today. I'm going to introduce each of them, tell you a little bit about them. Welcome everybody, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us for this Red Tech Radio Week. Hasina Kassem is the managing director of youth radio brand YFM, one of the first radio stations that were super serving young people in Johannesburg, South Africa, launched in the mid-1990s. And within a month of its launch, 600,000 listeners were supporting it. That's an extraordinary achievement. Hasina has been managing this adored youth brand since 2017. And it's a particularly challenging time that Hasina has been thrown this particular opportunity because young people have so much more choice than ever before. It's exactly why we asked her to join the panel. She started a career with CNBC Africa working in legal and HR. There's that legal face we can see now. And then moved to YFM in 2012 as their legal and compliance manager before ascending to the top position. Thank you, Hasina. Ken Benson is co-founder and partner of P1 Media Group. It's been an amazing ride from 1982. Can you believe it, Ken? From 1982, when you worked as a DJ at WBAB in Long Island, New York. Since then, successfully programmed multiple radio stations, including world-famous Z100. Worked at MTV as VP Music Programming, then in research at Pinnacle Media as the Senior VP International Business, and then built Jack FM, Play What We Want brand in the mid-2000s, what we in the radio business like to call the noughties. And what a decade it was. What a career you've had, Ken, and the wisdom and experience of all of that time is what we're calling on today as music radio in particular faces its most challenging years. And Rüdiger Landgraf is the head of strategy and digital at Krone Hit, Austria's largest commercial radio station. He's been in radio since 1991, relative spring chicken then, and has spent the last decade obsessing, quite rightly in my view, your obsession, about the superior personalization and customization offered by music streaming services. An obsession that led to the creation of Krone Hit's Skip FM, making it possible for linear radio to be customizable and personalized based on everybody's personal preferences. So just from that very brief CV, you can hear, those of you who are watching and have joined us live, that we have got an amazing panel. Just to let you know that if you are watching on redtech.pro, you're watching on a YouTube video on the back end, there's opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and of course, right at the end of the session, we'll pose any of those questions that come through to this expert panel. Now, you are lucky that you can watch this free of charge, despite the incredible expertise of the panel we have, and that's because we have a sponsor. Fancast has sponsored this particular session on day one, and for the next couple of minutes, let's see what Fancast is all about. And we're waiting for the video.
Hi, I'm Detlef Wiese, CEO and co-founder of Fancast. Together with my team, we created Extreme, the new software solution, let me even say revolution, for the radio market. Today, Fancast has achieved a significant footprint in the German market. Our vision is to offer solutions for any live audio application, reliable live audio 24 hours, 7 days. With Extreme, existing hardware products are fully redundant. We at Fancast stand for less space, less power consumption, lower operational cost and lower investments. Sounds interesting? It's actually the same slim, lean, Extreme software for all applications, simplifying your workflow. We started with OTT streaming, expanded to DVB multiplexing, podcast creation and conversion, and even SIP audio communication for reporters and commentators. Our customers picked us. Deutschlandradio for streaming and podcast conversion, Südwestrundfunk for streaming and DVB, Radio Berlin-Brandenburg for streaming and Hessischer Rundfunk for OTT streaming and DVB multiplexing. More to come. We offer you a tailored solution for your live audio challenges. Be ready to experience with us new and cool products in 2021. Follow us on social media, subscribe our newsletter, and come to our website, fancast.com. Let's keep in touch with each other. Stay tuned.
And yeah, thank you, Fancast, for taking care of this for us, for sponsoring today's session. And let's get to it, the challenge. And most of radio's audiences, as we know, people like me, too old, grew up with the habit of radio. Radio's prominence as the only live, real-time entertainment and information opportunity or media on the dashboard of a car certainly helped sustain the medium for decades. And I mean real time, and that was very important. But there's more choice than ever before. I want to start with you, Hasina, because you run a youth radio brand in a country that has an enormous young population. Does radio have a challenge attracting young listeners today?
So thank you so much, Omar, for inviting me to this discussion. I'm very excited to be a part of it. Just to introduce YFM to the audience. So YFM was established in 1997. Speaks to a market aged between 18 to 35-year-olds, and that's just the recorded age that we speak to. But naturally attracts a much younger audience as well, which is not surveyed. So yes, it's been a tough journey, and I think with the advent of all of the other digital media platforms, social media, the change in the landscape has definitely changed the way in which we as a brand need to develop our product and also putting our product out there. Especially over the last 2 years with the pandemic that we just spoke about, we noticed that there was a change in consumption patterns. So what we knew to be a fight for audience attention was now propelled into a space where you weren't having people moving around as normal. And naturally, that changed the way in which the younger audience consumes different types of media. I think there's also been a global trend towards time spent listening, reducing with the varied options, a myriad of options that are available to the audience at this stage. So yes, it has been a challenging time, but I think as YFM has always been at the forefront of change and has always been at the pulse of the audience. So in as much as it's been a task, it's come very naturally to make sure that we find ourselves in spaces where our audience is at. So if they're playing on mediums like TikTok, which we found, especially in the South African market now, there's been an uptake in, we play in that market. And over the years, we've seen the same thing with Twitter, Facebook, and other mediums for that matter. We obviously have the challenge of or what others would assume to be the challenge of the music streaming services. And again, I think all that's happened is that it's forced us as a brand to continually innovate and find new ways of keeping the audience within the brand community, and really shaping the product to make sure that it still attracts that younger market. So relevance is definitely a buzzword around the office, making sure that we resonate and relevant at every single point, and we find ourselves in every place where our market are playing in at the moment. I'm not sure if you want me to expand on that, yeah?
Yeah, we will later, Hasina, because right at the end, I'm going to ask each of you to tell the people that are watching your top 5 or top 10 tips, very specifically how you're winning that audience, because like you say, it's under threat, it's under challenge. Maybe it's different in different markets as well. And I want to go to Ken around that. Ken, and you work in multiple markets around the world, and maybe you notice variability as well, that in some markets, young people are still interested, still listening to the radio, but certain other markets, more mature markets, maybe that is less the case. Give us some insights.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. In the mature, fully developed markets, we're absolutely seeing diminished listening and TSL shrinking. In fact, I just saw some numbers on Friday from Nielsen in the US. If you compare the pop and rhythmic CHR numbers from 2011, so 10 years ago to now, the shares are down 40%, which is a remarkable number. And it just reiterates that the world has changed. right? And as Hasina said, there's so much more fighting for young people's attention that we need to change as well. And I think there's been this conservatism in radio programming now for way too long. And we're playing defense instead of offense with all these things going on around us that we really can't control. Yeah, we can get into TikTok, which, by the way, was the #1 most downloaded app in the world for the last 2 years, right? This is happening. And the 18 to 29s and 20 to 29s are the biggest users of that platform. You know what's happened with Spotify and other streaming platforms. Now, we're not designed to be a Spotify replacement. We're a different experience. And I think we need to think about the strengths, what we can offer, the points of differentiation. And I do believe there is a place for companionship, for a place for people to feel connected. And radio needs to work really hard on redefining itself. And again, to reiterate something Hasina said and what they do, how do we remain relevant today and into the future?
Yeah, that's correct. We're going to obviously come back and get into the detail, get into the weeds, as it were. Austria, Rudiger, older population, I would think. But you know, the problem with people like me at this age is we're dying off. We're getting older. Radio's audience, traditional audience, people who grew up on it, fewer and fewer of us around. What's happening there?
Yeah, people like you and me have a limited customer lifetime value compared to young people. We have to admit that.
That's right.
I'm totally with you in that. So the point is that I couldn't agree more with the two previous speakers. I think radio has to think of its strengths. Often we're thinking of how lucky the Spotify guys are to have this personalized experience for everyone. And we can bring people together. Radio can build a community. Think of the big fundraisers on Spotify. I don't know of any of them. So obviously, Spotify is used as a very selfish medium. People use their own playlists, and that works like a breeze, and they have machine learning and everything. And they have the music rights for that, which is also pretty hard for the broadcasters to overcome that obstacle. But radio doesn't have a disadvantage because it broadcasts the same thing to everyone at the same time. It should be the advantage. And if you think of that, it's about bringing people together. It's about creating live and unique content with beloved people that you want and that you know. And that's something we have to focus on, even if we know that young people are interested in music. And it's not like all of the CHR stations will turn into talk radio stations and that will save the radio industry. I'm not so sure about that. But music alone is simply not enough in times like these. That's a very trivial thing. But I think charity always is a good example how to bring your community, your listeners into the same shoes and unite them in a tribe, and that's totally important.
Yeah.
But I just want to add a second point. Sorry. The hard thing is also we don't know exactly how to measure it. I mean, when we're talking about listeners' figures in all the countries, we have different ways of measurement. Ken just mentioned before the latest PPM data from the States that's measured differently to Austria or to South Africa. In Austria, at least, we know it's pretty hard to get young people into the telephone interviews that we're still using. And we're starting now with a little amount of web interviews. Issue is that the big stations are not a big fan of web interviews because typically they are prompted, so people can tick from a list the station name, whereas in telephone interviews, they have to remember themselves. And with young people, it's pretty hard to get those people to a phone call of 20 minutes or more to find out their radio behavior. So this is also a big obstacle for the industry in the long run, how to keep our ratings research future-proof. So sorry.
No. I'm glad that I was going to talk about that a bit later, but you know, this is it. This is the device that changed the world for radio. But we can all pick it up here. Use your broadband, use your plan, and you can listen through apps and so on and so on. But the issue is it as attractive? And again, the dashboard being really critical. So I definitely want to talk about that. But is it as attractive as the other alternatives you can pick up on that device? So when you were in your car, and when I was a young guy, this was it. You had the radio. news, information, music, nothing else, no choice. CD, but that's why I mentioned real-time live. CD wasn't, right? It was a different experience, like you're saying today. Now that world is gone. I want to hear concrete ways from each of you for how we step up and become relevant and important again, or stay relevant. I mean, you've sort of touched on these things, but I want to hear concrete ways. So let's start again. Let's go round again back to you, Hasina. Concrete examples of how you can still own that dashboard when we know generations of vehicles coming now and will soon be everywhere else in the world. It's not your only choice. Radio is not going to be your only choice on that dashboard. Generations of listeners, this is the primary device. And there's so much else that you can get in a queue while waiting for Social Security or whatever it is you're waiting for. Talk to me, Hasina.
Okay, so I think Huda actually mentioned something quite important, and it's about what is radio's unique selling point. Within the South African landscape, I think, it's really showcased itself and put itself up as the hero of connected media. And it's about that personal connection between the listener and the other person on the other side of the mic. And playing to that, I think, is a really important thing. So, yes, you have a myriad of options available. And what we found is that our listeners are obviously still looking for the local type of content that's going to resonate with them. So what we've done, I mean, we've launched our app, and it's been 3 years since we've launched the app, and have been actively pushing app listening because, as you said, mobile device listening has increased considerably. And I mean, in the South African market, naturally, YFM has one of the biggest audiences on device listening. It's about creating content that they're consuming on other platforms and making it available, and similar content developed by the station itself being available on that platform. So keeping the audience with us, making sure that from a presenter point of view, the presenter is connecting at a level, because largely, I mean, that's the difference between radio and any other streaming platform, right? You have someone speaking to you in a language that you understand. And we have put a lot of investment into audience research and insights in terms of what they're going through, where they are at right now, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, what are the things that they want to be doing, and making sure that we are in those spaces. So from an app point of view, we've made sure that the content that we're placing in the space allows for time spent on the app. So an increased time spent on the app and spending with the content of the station outside of the linear content that we produce. So on demand, making available on-demand radio listening is definitely something that we've done, and it seems to be working really, really well. So basically, if someone's not consuming live radio at any given point, they are able to go back and listen to their favorite segment at any point, at any other stage in the day. Our app is also very data efficient, which is a considerable issue in the South African market. I mean, our data costs are really, really high still. And there is a massive barrier. And I think that's also something that's very important to us, is making sure that we create the level playing field in our space. You've got areas in which there is access to the internet, and then there's a massive part of the audience who don't. And so how do you make content available? We've obviously reduced our the size of our app and how much data it actually uses, and now creating the on-demand services definitely has helped. I'm not sure if you want me to go into other spheres and other spaces, Omar.
We'll get there. Let me take
Yes.
what you've said and now throw that at Ken and ask Ken to expand on that. So, Hasina and Rudiger earlier talked about this sense of community that radio still has, that radio creates. Do young people care about that when they've got other ways in which they can connect with other people? And that, Facebook's been around for a couple of decades now. There are other ways to connect, WhatsApp, et cetera. Do they care enough about that particular thing that used to be radio's secret sauce? Is it still radio's secret sauce?
Well, I would say, I believe the answer is yes. There's personal connection that happens through their Instagram accounts or their Facebook accounts, which I guess with young people now is pretty much irrelevant. That's been replaced. But I think that personal connection obviously exists. But there's a greater experience that I think people like to share in as well. And it's a matter of creating that experience, creating something worth listening to, that shared experience. People can't get anywhere else. The radio station can bring it to them. And I think it all comes back to putting a much greater focus and investment on the content. And what radio, I believe, has done a poor job, particularly in the really developed markets over the last 10 years, there's been a decline in content investment. And people are trying to do, more with less, and it's not working. And we've become very safe and predictable and loaded down with too many ads in a world where these young people on their phones, sitting through a 5-second YouTube ad is painful, and we expect them to sit through 3, 4, 5 minutes in a row. So if we're not offering something outstanding to find and tune to and bring people in, we're not going to make it.
So I'm going to, when I cross over to get Rudiger's view, I want you to think, Ken, about exactly where that content investment should be going, in what sorts of areas, because we keep saying this, there is so much content choice. What about what radio produces is going to be unique and interesting to bring young people back to this medium? So just think about that. And I want to go to Rudiger in Austria. One of the things you did to try and create a better experience for younger listeners is it's I guess false to say it was me too when you created Skip FM, but you understood that personalization matters, customization matters to a significant part of the audience. So you created the Skip FM. But is that just being like the competition now and trying to compete that way rather than emphasizing the uniqueness of what radio is?
I think you have to do both things. You have to rely on radio strengths, but you cannot deny that the radio usage has shifted to new devices. And I think every device has its own logic. Like a smart speaker, for example, you don't need too much interaction there. People don't say, "Hey, Alexa, skip every 3 seconds." They just are pretty happy with some background sound. It's a different ballgame on smartphones. So I think radio has to adapt to each device, and on smartphones, we need a higher interaction rate. So that's the reason why we created Skip FM. And also a point that's very important, we have to have reliable signal also on mobile devices. And even in Austria, the mobile devices are not that good that I could really stream the 128 kilobit MP3 throughout the city without any dropouts. So we should also try to invest into bandwidth adaptive technology like HLS or Dash instead of this fixed MP3 streaming, which is pretty prehistoric nowadays. But that's just one part of the story. The other part is really what can keep radio relevant. And I'm pretty sure that bringing people together is the important thing. And I give you an example, which is just a small one, but a few months ago, 2 of my presenters collided with their cars while trying to drive home after a show. And it was great content because it's something that happens to everyone. It was a big struggle, a big quarrel between those two because they, of course, naturally they blamed each other. And it's this thing of tiny little personal stories that are the difference between radio and Spotify.
And I think that's again critical. If all you're doing is back announcing, and I remember being a DJ and being told, listen, you got 30 seconds, just tell them what song they just heard and what song's coming up, and then move on. Nobody wants to hear what you've got to think or say. And that world hopefully is now, increasingly being quashed, and we're told, oh, we want to hear your personality, we want to hear your opinions, we want to know more about you as a textured 3D person and what you think about the world. I'm going to come back to you, Ken, because I'm hoping you've made those notes now, because I'll get to you just now to push you on. But Hasina, concrete examples, anecdotes, I think are going to be important in this discussion for those that are watching this. They want to know, what do you mean? We're speaking these words, but tell us something that you did that resonated and made an impact, and young people just went wild, and we created some virality as radio, because that's what everybody's talking about. This is viral, this from TikTok, wow, look at it, it's just this meme, that. What are we doing that's going viral? Have we managed to create that kind of excitement that these other platforms seem to be doing, and then creating memes and etc.?
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what we've done over the last while. Just last year, we basically introduced, we got into the podcasting space, and which is an extension of radio programming. And I mean, that did exceptionally well, because there were conversations and discussions with artists and musicians that extended beyond just the usual type of questions. It was about in-depth getting to know the personality behind the music. And again, to the point earlier, it's that connected medium where you're hearing the real story behind a person and the personality that you so love. Very recently as well, we used TikTok as a launch tool for our lineup, which worked really well. There's been a number of other pieces of content that we've done, like we launched a campaign called Be the Next. So in the South African market, and with YFM being the youngest commercial radio station in the country, there's a constant need to nurture new talent. And what we found worked exceptionally well was that we needed the audience to engage a lot more with the radio product that the product that we actually put out as a radio station. So historically, how I think radio talent have always been sourced is looking at community radio stations, looking at campus radio stations as well, and finding talent. We also had developed a Y Academy where you nurture raw talent coming from straight out of schooling. What we decided to do last year was change it up a bit and have the audience placing talent on air. So we ran a competition for an entire month where we got a number of demos coming through, and then we got the audience to vote in who they think would be a suitable host for a show. What we found worked incredibly well was that the audience now had a say in who they were putting forward. In the South African market as well, you have this open the industry, as they call it, open up the industry, give people equal opportunity. And having someone from the midst of the audience coming in and winning a show on one of the biggest youth brands in the country was a phenomenal feat for us. The engagement skyrocketed. We actually got sponsorship within 2 days of putting it out into the market. So from a commercial viability point of view, that worked really well. And we realized that developing content from the audience works incredibly well. So as opposed to just back announcing a song, you're telling a different story, and you're bringing a human whom is a part of the community that actually listens to you to the forefront and creating a story out of that person. Mm. Yeah, I mean that was one of the biggest campaigns that we ran last year, and from what happened last year, and we definitely know that the commercial aspect works. The client has basically committed for another couple of years and said this is something that we need to do going forward. So yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest examples I can give you.
Ken, that sort of collaboration with TikTok, and radio's been doing it for a long time. When Facebook arrives, we started to do Facebook live streams. We got on the bandwagon, got into Facebook, etc. I used to always think and wonder whether the greatest beneficiary is Facebook, not us. What's your thoughts on that kind of collaboration? Because it's not like we are, proper collaborators where we're sharing data and we're saying, well, I'm going to be there, so now give me all of that audience data that you get so that I understand who's come to you. Facebook doesn't work. It's not a two-way street. It's not what's that word in biology? Symbiosis? No. There's another word. It's parasitic, right? Because one party's benefiting more than the other. But tell me, Ken, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's TikTok today. Will it be TikTok 2 years from now? Who knows, right? It was Snapchat in the past, and Instagram and Facebook, and so I going too far down the road with them, you're in danger of TikTok no longer being the hip, cool, new shiny object that everybody's watching and participating with. So I know in Australia recently, last year for a few months, there was a TikTok radio station delivered by iHeartRadio over digital listening. Satellite radio here in the US also has a TikTok channel broadcasting now. And, you could probably afford to do that when you have over 100 channels via the satellite, that you could that kind of partnership on a grand scale. As far as TikTok is the place where music is breaking right now. It's no longer radio, and late artists are taking their music right there. So if I were programming CHR today, I'd absolutely be watching the trends and what's exploding on TikTok, and probably taking some of those records and using them, and maybe using some TikTok branding in my programming, but rebranding or turning my station into a TikTok radio, I don't know if that's the right solution. There's many different things going on in the ecosystem that we exist in, and learning from all of them and probably taking a little bit from all of those different pieces is probably a better strategy.
Okay. Tell me more about what we were speaking about earlier, which I sort of said I'd come back to you. And then, of course, I got diverted by this particular issue. So are there concrete examples you've seen in your travels as P1 Media Group, supporting, helping, assisting so many radio stations, radio groups around the world? Are you seeing specific things something that struck you, or even mistakes that some are making? I mean, you talked about one here about being careful about how you use some of these social media platforms, but are you seeing some big wins and perhaps some big failures that you can warn those who are watching against, or, support them with based on your travels?
Right. Well, probably the thing I see most is most stations are still programming like it's, like you said earlier, pre-smartphone, right? And the world has changed dramatically, especially for young people that they don't know life without a smartphone in their hand. And this is what we're competing against, those really short attention spans. And in fact, there was a study some years ago by Microsoft that says the average human attention span is now 8 seconds. If you look at Twitter stats over the last 10 years, a trending story would be over 24 hours. Now they say a trending story globally lasts 11 minutes, right? It's really changed. And here we are playing music and ads, and we have to offer so much more than that. And today as well, we're in this economy that's transitioning from ad-supported to subscription-supported. And the younger people are leading the charge on subscriptions. Now, how you have a subscription to an FM station, that's a whole nother matter. There's probably ways to do that. I know there's morning shows that are doing things with subscription premium content for their biggest fans, and you can make a lot of money with subscriptions without that many people paying. But the greater question is, since we're really talking about primary stations today in FM, is your station subscription worthy? People had to pay. Is there something on their station they pay to listen to? And I think many stations would fail that litmus test. Music is not enough. That's not going to be the driver. People can get more music, more variety with fewer ads on any streaming service. So the question we ask is, what does your station offer that's unique and recurring, daily or weekly, which cannot replicate by a competitor and is so interesting and entertaining, people make it a point to listen? I mean, great radio has always had that, but today we're in this content, the golden age of content right now. There's more money being spent on audio and TV and film production than at any point. So there's more competition than ever. And if we don't have something we can put the flag in the ground for and be famous for, that people love, and make it a point to come to your station, your station's in trouble.
The challenge, though, Rudiger, is that all that money being spent on audio content, very little of it is from people who've been at the forefront of audio for generations. It's not the radio station spending all of that money.
That's totally right. And I think it's always good to invest in programming, especially if you have a strategy first and you know in which direction you want to head. So that's totally okay. But we also have to say that radio still has such high ratings that make it hard to be so tribal like small podcasters are, or social media bubbles are. I mean, even if you look at the biggest podcasters in Germany and Austria, being, for example, Jan Böhmermann on Spotify, a very famous comedian, if you look at the minutes, at his total TSL per week, every radio station would suffer from that. So we are still a little bit haunted in having to find a compromise that doesn't exclude too much, because building a tribe also means excluding other people, and we have to be careful to find the right amount of doing that, not to kill our own ratings. So that's something going on. And let me add a second thing, that I think in research we used to look at a specific generation or age group, and we said, okay, this is what they want. And I think we have to look at this in a new way and say, this is what the radio listeners in this age group want. And there's other people who don't listen to the radio anymore. And guess what? I don't program to them.
That is a very, very important thing you've just said. And that's at the heart of all strategy, making choices. So you're saying one of the things that radio stations have to come to terms with is that there are people who will never come to the radio. Stop over catering to them, because you lose the loyalists that do love radio. And that's hard to do, I'm sure, because if you're draining audiences and some of those that are leaving you have decided that their passion is the alternatives that are available, do you go after them to try and win them back? Or do you say there must be more like the ones I already have, but I just haven't found them yet? What is the right thing to do here, Rudiger?
I think the right thing is not to run after those who have already left radio. And it's easy, for example, to tell in music styles. There is a music style in Austria which is very strong on YouTube, which is German hip hop. And every time we test it towards the radio audience, it doesn't work at all. So obviously there's a huge difference between 17-year-olds who listen to music primarily on the smartphone on YouTube, and among those people of the same age that still listen to radio. And I think we have to try to address those people who stick to radio and do our best job there, because the others obviously are in such small groups that it's really hard for a mass medium to approach them. We can approach them, of course, with some of our spoken word content and also by the personalities we have in the radio. But music-wise, I think they're gone.
Ken, how would you respond to that as a strategy, as an approach?
Well, I think Rudiger is really on the money. We can't serve every niche out there. We're a mass medium, right? And we still need to deliver mass audiences to monetize our radio stations. So, how do we do that? We do that with amazing content. And as I've said multiple times already, it's not the music that's going to deliver that in the numbers we need anymore. So, I've certainly had some thoughts on things we can do there, if you'd like me to share a few of them.
Yeah, please. That's what people are here for.
But,
please go ahead.
Yeah, we've got to, pretty much tear up the playbook. We need to experiment. We need to do different things. We need to deliver things differently. I still believe, CHR can be, and I guess since we're talking young audience, let's talk CHR, because that's what would affect most of us tuning into this webinar. It's a contextualized, lean in the moment experience. These young people have an insatiable appetite to be entertained and to laugh. I mean, just look what they're doing all day long on TikTok. They're watching short videos that generally are funny or get a smile. YouTube is much of the same. Obviously, we've got to play the hits and mass appeal records. We're not the place they're going to hear new music. In fact, I think a lot of CHRs make big mistakes when they're talking about, hey, this is the latest from so-and-so. And a lot of your audience had heard that record on TikTok 6 months ago. I think the traditional DJ approach, whether it's done or not, I don't know, but I would certainly be experimenting. We know authenticity is kind of a buzzword of the day, and having real people on the air that sound like real people, not hypey DJs, is essential. We need to think about new and different types of features, whether it's a listener-hosted playlist, maybe a late-night podcast feature, a Spotify playlist. I think something that radio used to do a fairly good job at and is become jukeboxes, but you think about what the pandemic has done to young people, particularly. There's a lot of young people that are very afraid, depressed. Their lives have been put on hold. And, here we're this fun radio station making people laugh and playing music all the time. It might make sense to experiment. And why not have a counselor on at night or a psychologist on at night that would take calls from the audience and talk to these people about real problems that are really affecting them. You talk about a connection and being stronger. I mean, I even think back to as a kid in New York, there was a sex therapist on a station on a Sunday night, and every kid in high school would listen to it and come in the next day and talk about it, because you can hear about things that you couldn't talk about with your parents. You couldn't really talk about your friends because you didn't know. But we've got to think about making a much more meaningful connection with the audience and being a place that's not just fun and entertainment, but a place that really reflects their entire life. So I think those are a few things that I'd at least be thinking about as you try and reinvent for today's audience.
Thank you, Ken. To Hasina, you talked, I want to take this back from just segueing, to use that lovely word from our industry, to you, Hasina, recruitment. So you talked about doing this sort of reality show way of bringing new DJs in, but are you recruiting from different places now? Because people are so, their ambitions are different. They used to want to be radio DJs, now they want to be TikTok stars or YouTube stars and that sort of thing. Are you recruiting from different places than you would have done 5 years ago?
So yes, there's definitely a move towards that. But as you know, there's a very specific talent that you look for in broadcast, in a broadcaster, in a true broadcaster. And so we generally we do have a struggle when it comes to taking a TV personality and shoving them in front of the
TV,
mic.
but that's so 20th century. Why are you even talking about TV?
No. I'm just saying in terms of from and you can take like we've recently, so at our launch, we actually did a brand refresh launch in October. And what we did was we partnered with the likes of TikTok to do a live stream from there. Taking a personality and a talent from that is really big on the TikTok platform, a South African local, very relevant someone, and teaming her up with our breakfast co-host worked really, really well. And so that's obviously triggered for us. How do we go and make sure that you're creating broadcasters? Because it's very important for us to make sure that you are developing a broadcaster from talent that exists in other spaces. So yes, there's definitely a view to getting talent from other spaces, as opposed to taking a broadcaster and trying to plug them into different platforms. It doesn't always work. The authenticity is that Ken was speaking about now is a really big thing for us as well. And you're speaking to an audience who are so real, who get and understand what radio is. So even through our focus groups, historically you wouldn't find the audience understanding when a jingle would play, how commercial content is integrated into normal content, and they get all of that. They're a very smart audience, and so authenticity is really important, and making sure that you're bringing raw talents or raw conversations across. I know I'm digressing now, but just to touch on something earlier that was also mentioned was around, making sure that your content is also not just an upbeat, let's talk about the entertainment industry and really tap into what young people are really thinking about. So something that we did through the pandemic, noticing that there was obviously a shift, also specifically from a mental health point of view, was we decided to introduce a once a week talk show, talk hour or talk 2 hours during the week, which is introducing just a completely new program into our lineup. And what we found was the uptake was so massive, and there was definitely a need to speak about real issues. And what that led to was over this last programming year, we then introduced it on a daily basis. And you can see that it's helping. It helps the community. It helps our audiences. And basically, that's what attaches them to the brand. Because now they've got a brand, a youth brand that not only speaks to them musically, which is predominantly why they come to the station. They come for the music, they come for the entertainment. But now they've got personalities that connect with them in terms of what they're going through in their day-to-day lives. Understand their mental health. They understand the struggles from an unemployment point of view, which is something that's quite rife in the South African market. So it's really there's a fine balance that we've had to strike over the last few years between going the very tribal niche market, which is where I found we were heading, just to sort of avoid being the run-of-the-mill radio station, right? So I found that the station was going down a very niche path, and then trying to get us into a space that would grow audiences, because ultimately that's what we need to do, right? We're a commercial player, and you need to grow attention, you need to grow content, you need to or grow the attention to the brand. And so striking the balance between niche music and commercial music, especially in a market like ours, was something that we need to play with and massage into the product over a period of time. Because now you don't want to jar the P1 listeners and lose them all at one time. So there was that balance that we had to strike, while still being the cool, very entertainment-focused brand, yet being very close to the touch points of the audiences and speaking about serious, sensitive, very real issues. So yeah, it's been the striking of the balance seems to be the most difficult, and yet if you get it right, the most rewarding, because you have listeners that are now attached to the brand, and despite where you find yourself, despite there being these myriad of options, they're still going to hold dear and connected to the brand that is why, because we have given them something that nobody else could.
I think, like Ken said earlier, you got to throw out the old playbook and start with a new one. Write the new one for a totally different world that you're competing in. Many of those old rules don't apply. Rudiger, nobody's mentioned hyperlocal. You got to radio stations have a defined area. I guess less so when you're on a mobile phone. You can be heard. You could be an Austrian radio station heard in Lisbon. It doesn't really matter anymore. But your FM transmission has a radius. Is that issue about being very focused on local important? I guess it is for your ratings, because that ratings happens in Vienna or in Johannesburg or in Lisbon, wherever you are.
Well, we are so fortunate or unlucky, as you might put it, to operate some 140 different FM transmitters across Austria. So we are a nationwide station. So being local for us, of course, is being Austrian. But I think it's true, even if you're a nationwide station or a local station, it's the same. This is your own target. This is your market. These are the people that you are supposed to know better than the international players. And of course, having said that, it's important to be local.
Does it help that you speak in a language that is different from the big platforms? Like, they tend to be Anglophile. They tend to be English. the Google, the Facebook, I guess TikTok's just video, so it doesn't matter what language you want. Does it help to be speaking in German, for example? Does it put up barriers that you're a non-English speaking country? I don't know if it does.
The good thing is that in Austria, people don't speak the same German like in Germany, because the biggest overspill in terms of media use would be from Germany, and not like between Canada and the US or Belgium and France. But the point is that we have our own Austrian radio language, so to say, which was created sometimes in the 1920s. And still then there's an Austrian way of pronouncing things officially. And that helps us to be accepted as an Austrian radio station.
Okay. Ken, does that local thing really matter anymore? Or because these platforms are global, that people's view on what kind of content's most important to them is changing? Because you can find your local coffee shop by getting into Google. And in the old days, it had to be Omar on the radio saying, hey, I just tried this new coffee shop that's just launched down the road, man. It's amazing. Got great cappuccino. Doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, my sense would be it matters less to young people than people. And I mean, they just want to be entertained. They're living in the moment and, not thinking all that much about the future, right? So, I think it's important to be local. Certainly when I program stations, we're obviously very local and immersed in the community. And everything we did for the local audience, like you said about ratings, I mean, outside our FM transmitter at the time, we didn't really care because it didn't generate us any revenue. So I do think that's important. But more important than being local is being relevant and in the moment and entertaining and being a lean-in experience that listeners want to tune into.
I did an interview on the Red Tech briefing that we run here at Red Tech with Larry Rosen from Edison Research. And he said to me, quite controversially, I think, maybe not controversial, he's concerned about the future of music radio as it's currently run, almost to the point that its runway is literally a few more years, maybe 5, maybe 10. But there's a point at which it goes extinct because of the way it's run. Would you agree with that? And if, you talked earlier about the fact that running 20 spots or 15 minutes or 20 minutes of spots in an hour is part of that killing of it. That's the business model problem. How do you change that in a market like the US?
That is the big question, isn't it? These big companies, Wall Street companies, have a lot of financial pressure. Certainly, radio revenue's been contracting in the U.S. for many years. It accelerated during the pandemic. So people are asked to do more with less, and it shows. I mean, we did a series of focus groups in the U.S. this year talking to audiences 35 to 54. And 35 plus is still a pretty good radio listener, right? They grew up with radio. It has a different meaning and context to them than a 15-year-old. But they're even noticing some of the things that we thought, they couldn't possibly notice at all the contests or national now. And that the stations aren't as visible as they once were, even in the local markets. And other things like that. So to me, that was really concerning and really an alarm that the people that we monetize the most, the people that listen the most, are starting to notice some of the weaknesses that we've created on their own. It is very concerning for the future.
Do you think there's a runway problem with radio, Rudiger? When you think about Europe, another mature sort of environment, most of the markets here are mature. They've been, radio's been around for a long time. Broadband is ubiquitous, low cost. That's, I guess, is a little bit of a barrier. It gives her maybe a longer runway because not everybody can access the internet at very fast speeds cheaply. That's not the case in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data in Austria is almost free, even on mobile phones. So you get unlimited bandwidth now for 15 euros per month. You get unlimited download volume on your smartphone. So this advantage of radio is gone. I know the idea that music radio will be extinct somewhere in the future. I'm pretty sure it's true. I just don't know exactly when this future is going to take place. So if you ask me now, do you think that in let's say 2100, music radio will still be around? I'm pretty sure it will not be around anymore. I'm pretty sure it will be around a kind of creating something together between people in an audio way that can be marketed. If we had invented, if Marconi or Popov or whoever invented radio could have invented it as a personalized stream, he would have done it. So a lot of the stuff we learned in radio is how to overcome technical obstacles that this kind of broadcasting brings us. And a lot of the art we learned in that, like how to program a clock and everything, is obviously pretty obsolete in streaming days. And we have to face that. I mean, a lot of the stuff we know we don't need anymore. It's just like that. But what we also know and what we also have learned is how to influence people and how to really get under their skin and how to give them goosebumps by radio moments. And this part of our knowledge will never be devaluated.
Okay, we're almost at an end. There are a couple more issues I want to deal with. One, remember, you guys are going to give these sort of 6, 5, 3, whatever you've got, great tips for those that are watching. So make sure that you're preparing that. But before we get to that last bit, and remember, we've got the extra window of 15 minutes. What I wanted to ask about is that measurement thing that Rudiger brought up very early on. Even today, apart from the fact that, with telephone surveys, young people don't have 20 minutes to answer what they might think are inane questions. But measurement seems to be very much caught in a very different century, because our listeners are listening on different devices. They're listening at different types of the day. Catch up, for example. And, you mentioned it, Hasina. People can listen whenever they want. They miss the morning show. They like the personalities. They're listening at 6 p.m., not at 6 a.m. But that's not captured necessarily because of the way questions are framed in terms of the way surveys are done. Are we missing? How do we change this, the way ratings are done, so that perhaps they're more accurate? Because people are listening to morning shows at different times. They're listening to finance shows in the morning on the way it was last night's show, but it's plugged into their car and they're catching it the next day. Are we losing listeners because of the way our rating systems currently are structured, Ken?
Well, there's so many different rating systems in different countries around the world. So, some is recall, some is meter, some is people knocking on doors. I mean, it really varies significantly. Are we losing listening? I would say in most cases, yes. Just finding people to participate in surveys now is more and more challenging. The rating companies have the exact same challenges. The samples get smaller and smaller. With the portable people meter in the US, which actually measures undetectable code in the signal, it's actually picking up real, I don't know if it's real listening, but it's real exposure to audio, right? Whatever it's picking up with that decoded signal. I mean, you walk into a convenience store and you pick up a station you don't even listen to, but it picked it up for the 3 or 5 minutes you're in the shop, and that station is getting credit for that. I mean, the answer is no. I don't think there is a great system at the moment. There's experimentation going on, and I hope we find a better way to measure audio more accurately. But the big concern now, and particularly in some of these PPM markets, and even major markets like Los Angeles, you hear programmers all the time talking about the influence 1 or 2 meters can have on the outcome for your station. It's unbelievable. And if you get those couple of meters falling your way, you can look fantastic. And as soon as the sample changes and a couple of those meters may fall out, you can look awful with no significant change to your product, with no major change to the competitive environment. And you sit there, wondering, what's real, what's not, and the ramifications it has for revenue are immense. So there's got to be a better way.
Hasina?
So we've, just very recently, South Africa is a little bit further behind. We've recently just come out of diary audience measurement, and have introduced the CATI interviews as well as MediaCell. And so we are still awaiting a full 6 month worth of data from the CATI, and then introducing MediaCell research into our currency come March this year. There's obviously, this has created a great level of instability from a research point of view, as well as created much difficulty from a programming perspective, because there wasn't any real data, current data, that was available for us as South African radio to really program on. But what it has done is it's created other opportunities for us to sort of gauge what the audience engagement is like, and what our audience listenership is sort of doing, without looking at, I wouldn't even say more or less accurate sort of data, but from a station specific point of view. And just to give you an example, I mean, we've used our own digital analytics to identify what our audience is doing at any particular time. We've used our streaming numbers as an indication of whether or not certain day parts are actually working better than others. So yeah, we've actually found ourselves in a very precarious situation and having to find really creative ways of showcasing return on investment to the client base, as well as making programming decisions. But yeah, I'm very hopeful and quite confident that in the coming months there'll be introduction of new ways and new forms of audience measurement.
Rudiger, until it's real time, is it ever going to be good enough?
It means good enough for what? I think that radio ratings we using are primarily for marketing purposes, to prove that we have good audience and also very competitive CPM, and that's the main thing. It's a measurement that the ratings agencies are used to, and it kind of works for them. Even if they all make their own research aside, still the belief in the official ratings is really high, and I think that's good for the industry, and we need that. Having said that, it shows clearly that for a radio station, it's totally important to bring your own listeners through the entry gate of these official ratings. And the entry gate in Austria is simply the question: do you have 20 minutes of time to talk about your radio behavior? And not very surprising, most of the people have better things to do, other than those that work in radio, of course. When I'm called, I would participate anytime. That's cool. So give them reasons to go through this entry gate, means also make your own brand for them, a love brand, so that they have the feeling they can give you something back when they are called. You entertain them 365 days a year. So probably if once a year they're called and they can give you 20 minutes back, might make sense.
Okay, well, let's round up now. Firstly, let's just take a compliment for all of you. Suman Basnet, excellent session, very well moderated. Well, maybe I shouldn't have said that bit, but he's clearly delighted with the sort of stuff you guys are feeding all of the audiences that are watching, which is great to see. It means that your time is well spent this morning, in your case, Ken, and of course the afternoon for the rest of you. Let's round up by giving the people who are watching those tips that you have for them to run a radio station in the 21st century, the most competitive era we've ever seen in our lives, and the risk of young people not building a radio habit. Let's start with you, Hasina.
Okay, so for me, I think collaboration is key. Identifying good brands that you can collaborate with. Not being afraid of new technologies and new platforms that are coming around, and finding ways to actually integrate into those spaces that speak to your audience, so that they can see you. I think from our perspective, becoming and cementing ourselves as a content brand, and a relevant content brand is key. I do think that a lot of players within the South African market are following the same path, and that is what's going to keep radio alive for us for a while longer. from a commercial point of view, radio is still very, very relevant in our South African landscape. And but using other platforms as a complementary tool to radio is probably the most important thing, and not doing it the other way around.
Thank you, Hasina. Rudiger?
Number one, take risks. It's pretty hard to be successful if you just try to play it safe. I'll give you an example. In Austria, we have a big discussion about the mandatory corona vaccination, and we will be the first country, I think, in the world that will have that for almost the entire population, age 18 plus. So, as you can imagine, it was a big topic, and we related our biggest promotion to the corona vaccination and said we doubled the price if you're vaccinated. And of course, it was utterly polarizing, and many people hated us for that, especially on Facebook. But in terms of people participating, I shall say it was pretty good. And taking risks is something that's important. The next thing is create more talk shows, especially in these times of the day where the ratings are not so important. It's more about the image, and it's more about creating some P1 attraction. Like we have a sex talk show in the evening, we have a girly talk show on Sunday, and probably we'll do more in that. And the third thing, still use the action that CHR Radio has in terms of promotions to do content that relates to the audience. For example, in Austria, it was pretty hard to marry 1.5 years ago due to the corona regulations, and we gave away a wedding in St. Stephen's Cathedral, which is the famous cathedral in the center of Vienna. And it was a huge promotion, and everyone could join in on video and also, of course, on the radio. And people talked about it because it was a dream that people had at the time to have a proper wedding, and we could give it to them. So,
with or without a full orchestra?
It was without a full orchestra, but we got one of Austria's most famous singers that is in our charts almost every month to be the wedding singer there. So it was brilliant.
Keep going. Sorry to interrupt. I just couldn't resist.
Yeah, and the last thing is still think about technology. I mean, a smartphone is a different device than a smart speaker, and the smart TV also differs again. And every time something new comes along, radio has to think, how can we work on that? And then again, also here, don't avoid the risks. Go there, invest, and maybe in 30-40% of the time you could fail, like all the radio stations that built second life radio stations 15 years ago, if you still remember that. That can happen, but it's okay. It's okay to fail.
And of course, we're now building them in Minecraft, or we were 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those were great. Ken, let's round up with you.
Okay. Well, first off, we need to stop being predictable and so safe. We need to rethink everything we do. We need to question, why do we do it this way? And usually the answer is because we've always done it that way, or we hear other stations or peer stations look up to doing it that way. And it's not going to get it done anymore. Just not. We need to create new experiences. We need to innovate. We need to encourage innovation. We need to embrace new technology and new platforms. iHeartMedia in the States announced last week that they partnered with a new platform called Roblox, which will allow them to use Web3 in the metaverse, create new events and experiences, which I assume we're going to be online and through virtual reality. But there's great opportunities out there to expand our brands in new places and create new experiences. Getting back to radio fundamentals, I mean, great radio stations have always been remarkable between the records. A station that's been primarily music, unless it had a really unique format at a marketplace, never really won in a big way. So we've got to be great. And fear of missing out, FOMO, always another big buzzword, but yet so important, and always something, at least when I was programming CHR, was essential to what we did. And I look at people like Mr. Beast now on YouTube and social media with 88 million subscribers, and some of his videos getting up to 200 million views. And I look at the types of things that he's doing, And it's a lot of stunts that radio used to do.
Mm-hmm.
He was buried alive for 50 hours for one. The last person to take their hands off the Lamborghini wins it. Okay, we didn't have a Lamborghini, but we did that promotion, right? He did one I saw recently, took people on an Uber ride and let them keep the car. Gave people a minute to spend $1 million. Well, you know, in 1 minute in any store, there's no way they're going to spend $1 million, but it sounds big, right? And it gets people tuning in. And now with all the extensions we can do through the technology platforms, it's really a great opportunity. But I'm going to leave people with, I think, one summary point is, what is the way into your radio station? What's that thing that would make people subscribe to your station and pay if they had to? And again, I think if we can't answer that question, we better find something quick, or, you know, we're just going to get lost in that clutter out there, because there's more now than ever.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the wisdom and expertise, Ken Benson, Rudiger Landgraf, Hasina Kasim. It's been amazing and a real honor and privilege to have you on the Red Tech Radio Week Day One. I think we've launched day one spectacularly well. I'm sure most of the viewers would certainly appreciate what you've said. And just for those of you that are watching and you have colleagues who haven't been able to catch this session because they've been listening to their favorite radio station and you couldn't interrupt them, tell them that this is available as a replay on redtech.pro, www.redtech.pro. You can watch the session, and it's not time bound. In other words, it's going to be there for as long as you need it to be there, so you can watch everything and hear the wisdom that we heard today from Rudiger, from Ken, from Hasina. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Omar.
Thank you.
Cheers.